Thank you guys so much for your energy and your time and attention and your commitment across the past few days. And you are being rewarded with an absolutely insane treat as we reach the close. I know, and it's not candy or Starbucks cards. It's bigger than that. It's Dr. Jessica Pryce, and she has committed to joining us today to give us the inspiration and charge that we need to go back home and continue to do incredible things. So I'm gonna share a little bit of background and information about her and try not to be gushy. It is hard not to be gushy because she has already had such an incredible influence on our work through webinars and supporting us in so many different ways across the past few years that we are deeply indebted to her for all of her contributions, not just to our work, but this work as a whole. She is by trade a social worker, so she is speaking from a space of experience and knowledge with boots on the ground and influence in that regard. And through that, she became an author so that she could share her work and experience with people like us who need to hear from someone that identifies with our work, someone who identifies with those experiences we have as we try to lift and hold hands and support families in this work. And as an educator, she has written numerous publications, and she's spoken widely on how we can assess and reimagine child welfare. Just on a personal note, my cousin does work with families in homeless communities and supporting them, and she's attended our webinars just to hear you along with her entire staff and text me and said, "Who is that woman?" And that's it. She is one of the greatest inspirations we have ever known. And she said, the fact that I don't even do your work, but we share work, and she's influenced how I work is insane. But that's how broad the reach is in this story. That's how deep the impact is in this story. And lives are changing because of our exposure and opportunities to partner and listen and learn from her expertise. She speaks on building systems that are more just and more equitable, and that is a heavy lift in this work, specifically when we talk about racial equity in this work, because there's so much carried into that storyline, but she makes it tangible in the way she communicates with us and the things that we might be able to build and do together. Dr. Pryce is no stranger to us in the infant toddler courts. And we count and honor her as a leader and a supporter in this work as we continue to explore practices and strategies that will build systems change using her guidance and support to lead the way. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Pryce.
Thank you all so much for having me. What a warm welcome. It's indeed a pleasure. I know so many familiar faces here. I've seen you either in a small dot on webinars or virtual trainings or at some of your other in-person conferences. It's always an honor and a pleasure. I've got to shout out Sharon Ross Donaldson. Please wave. This woman ushered me into child welfare, so I had to call her out. So I really appreciate her belief in me and her she was a counselor, she was a mentor over 15 years ago when I first started in the field. So glad to have you here in the audience. A lot of you probably have heard me talk about power dynamics and how do we shift our mindset and how do we really think about families and certain communities and what they need. Trying to shift our mindset from giving them what we got to really giving them what they need, right? So we want to be broad in how we consider what the needs are, but also be unique in trying to meet those needs. But today is a little different. Today I want to talk about how do you navigate change. When we talk about sharing power, changing mindset, considering equity, building in justice in our work, that takes change. and it takes trying to figure out how to bring your teams along with that change. So I get the privilege of working with child welfare agencies throughout the state of Florida on issues just like this. Dr. Pryce, we want to do this, but our team is sort of straggling behind, or we want to do this, we don't know where to start, or we started a new program, but we hit a roadblock, what do we do? So navigating change is huge in our systems and across our country. So that's what we'll focus on today. I think I have about 56 more minutes, and I'm gonna get you out of here, because I also have a flight to catch. All right. So this might be because I'm a professor, but I'm going to tell you where we're going and what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about evolutionary change and revolutionary change. We're going to talk about managing stakeholders and partners through change. So I always tell people we can't make change and then just not consider DJJ, not consider the court system, not consider mental health counselors. Like, how do you bring them along to the changes you want to make? The psychological impacts of change. Believe it or not, it's not easy for some people to change. Some of you are like, we know that, right? Or are all of your teams just really agile? Yeah, okay. So how does that impact folks when they're asked to change, and then leadership strategies for how to manage that? And then we'll end with how to build momentum, because it's not so hard to get motivated, but it's hard to keep the momentum when you're changing. So I wanted to start with this quote because I love it. And it says, change before you have to. And what Jack Welch is saying is, all of us have been in a situation where maybe it's a hammer brought down from the C-suites, from the federal government, from somewhere, and they say, this is happening. You have to change. And I've worked with organizations where that's the case, and it's not so great, right? Because you have no choice but to do what they're asking. And that could be because of data, it could be because of funding, budget cuts. You have to change. But I prefer change that's built around innovation, transformation. Change when it comes to folks standing up and saying, I think we can do things differently. So that's what I'll be talking about today. How do we become brave enough and have courage enough to promote change and bring along our teams? Because we don't want to change just because somebody tells us to. We want to be far ahead of that hammer. Got it? Before I continue, I have to touch on organizational trust, because I think it's intuitive to know that any changes that you leaders or folks are trying to institute, it's just not going to happen if there's not trust in your agency. So when I work with agencies, this is one of the first things that we assess. I worked with an agency for about 1.5 years, and at the beginning of working with them, I heard comments like, this is a sinking ship. I don't believe anything they say. I don't know what to believe. It was a lack of trust. And over the course of 18 months, that shifted. And then we were able to really think about, how do we promote change? Trust is built through actions that demonstrate a high degree of competence and the right intent, which result in things like demonstrated ability. Possessing the means to meet expectations means your teams believe your leaders have what it takes to do the job. You trust in their capability. Reliability, consistency, and dependability, meaning you do what you say you're going to do, and your leaders do what they say they're going to do. Transparency, openly sharing information, motives, and choices. Right? As leaders, I understand you may not be able to share everything, but people appreciate being able to be a part of decision making. We call that distributive decision making, right? Bringing folks to the table and talking about, hey, this is happening. I want to get your input. And then humanity, genuinely caring about the experience and well-being of your teams. If you're able to constitute this in your agency, implementing any change is going to be viable and is highly, highly going to be successful, right? Organizational trust is really the impetus for any change you want to push forward. Right? I'm going to quickly talk about root cause analysis, which is a systematic approach to understanding what factors contribute to an outcome by focusing on the causes, not the symptoms, right? So we can talk about this from so many angles. Sometimes I talk about this as it relates to working with families, and I think each and every one of you know how that goes. This idea of you see these very open and obvious things. Maybe it's somebody arguing with you, a lot of anger, substance abuse. Like, you see these things, these weeds that are easy and obvious, but we're shifting our organizations and our systems to try to get to the root cause of what could be impacting what those families are going through. But when I talk about root cause analysis as it relates to change, because I work with the workforce and professional development and leadership, I think as you consider change and you start to see things sprout up in your agency, it's going to be important to figure out what's underneath it. A quick example, micromanagement. I know we all like that, don't we? So when you see someone being micromanaged, right? Maybe you are being micromanaged. It's very obvious, and it's above the surface. It's like one of those weeds that we see in our work. This is an organizational challenge for a lot of systems. And when we do assessments and work with agencies, we realize that 9 times out of 10, the root issue of micromanagement is actually a lack of trust. You don't trust the person who you're asking to do the job. But we also found that sometimes it's a lack of trust in or security in yourself. Sometimes leaders are insecure and have a lack of trust in themselves, so they micromanage others. That's an example of, as you're instituting change, as you're working with your teams, think about the things that are really obvious that are going on in your agency, and don't just focus on those. What's actually underneath it? This connects to the trust aspect. What is actually going on beneath your organizational operations? Because you're going to have to be aware of that if you want to create change and be successful in implementing it. Right. So as you think about root cause analysis, we're going to talk about this framework: evolutionary and revolutionary change. So I use this all the time, and I really appreciate the feedback from folks that find it useful in child welfare. As you can see, evolutionary change is, I think, what we're all really comfortable with. It's inevitable, expected, incremental, right? Evolutionary change usually happens to make sure you survive as an agency. As long as you're alive, right? We just want you to survive as an agency. We're going to continue to evolve. Not exactly that you're thriving, not exactly that your workforce is thriving or the families you serve are thriving, but simply that you exist. We will continue to evolve. When you evolve as an agency, it focuses on improving your programs. We're really good at making things better, but I always want to challenge folks to make things different. Right? We're good at making things better, but how do we make it different so families feel and start to experience different outcomes? When you are focused on simply evolving as an agency, you're focused on protecting children and helping their families. Nothing wrong with that. We actually need evolutionary change, but I just don't want us to stop there. To me, protecting children and helping their families is a given. That's why we're all sitting here. But how do we push into revolutionary change, right? It's not just inevitable. It's not going to happen whether we like it or not, right? It only happens if there's an intentional push to make it happen. It's profound, it's fundamental, it's transformational. It's often a complete overhaul and a reconstruction of what you're working on, a different mindset. I discussed, like, shifting our mindset in a revolutionary way. It focuses on what is the foundation. Remember the root cause. What is the root cause of what's going on in our agencies? We can't just stay up here, because that means we're simply evolving. But a revolutionary approach is what is actually going on underneath it. Instead of just protecting and helping, because again, that's a given. That's why we're all here. We want to ensure that children have an uninterrupted sense of belonging, and we want to strengthen their families. Right? We want them to, when they finish working with our organization, their capacity has been lifted. They're stronger than they were, right? They're not cowering because we've harmed them in some way, right? That's the type of systems that we all want to create. That's the change that I've been seeing around the country of folks saying, I want to do things differently. That uninterrupted sense of belonging for youth. You know, the belonging research now says that it's not that kids just need an adult. They need their adult. They need adults that love them and already know them, right? That care about them. That's when they feel the most secure, and that's where there's an uninterrupted sense of belonging. They always feel like they belong. That's the sort of agencies that we all want to change and become. As you go back to your respective agencies, I tell leaders all the time, when you think about this framework and you're in your next staff meeting and you're talking about an initiative, because we are the initiative people. We do a lot of things. We do a lot of changes. I want you to start asking the question, are we in the evolutionary mode of change, or are we in the revolutionary mode of change? It should elicit some interesting conversation in your staff meeting. And again, we need evolutionary change. Hopefully there's a little bit of both, but if we simply are evolving, we're not going to really get to where we're trying to go in child welfare. All right. Another quote. It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. Charles Darwin. I love this quote because it reminds me, I'm an ex-athlete. I used to play basketball, no brainer, and volleyball. And my coach used to always say, the best players are actually not the most skilled. Some of you must be coaches because you're nodding. The best players are not like the most agile. Like the best players are people that are coachable. And what are people that are coachable? They manage change. The coach says, change that. And they're able to manage it without what? Being mad, doing their own thing, shutting down, right? So I really appreciate that because it reminds me of what my coach said. I want you to be the best, but you can't if you're not coachable, if you're not responsive to change. Each and every one of your teams, when you go back to your respective agencies, I want you to start thinking, look at your team. Who's responsive to change, right? How do I get them to be more responsive to change? How do I get them? How do I motivate them? How do I encourage them? How do I empower them to see change as a good thing, not a nuisance? Right? And the thing about change is you have to find a balance. You can't do too little because we stick with the status quo. But if we go too rigid, people shut down. Right? And we'll talk about that today. All right. So we're going to go into a discussion around stakeholders. I want you to put on your thinking caps. Who are those stakeholders? People who are vested interest, have a vested interest in your work, persons who are impacted by your work, right? And those who care about how the things that you are doing turn out. I want you to think about a level of change you're working on right now, whether it's a project, a policy, an initiative, a change procedure, something that you're working on, something that your agency is working on. Maybe it's a new training modality. I want you to put that in your mind right now as we talk about this, because I tell people all the time, we need our partners and stakeholders with any change that we have going on. I'm working with an agency right now that realized they needed to bring their teachers, it's a small town, educators, school social workers, the principal, even some school board people to some interdisciplinary training because they're doing some revolutionary work, but they realize their data is showing that like 85% of the calls they get through their DCF department is coming from teachers. So they wanted to bring them to the fold to figure out how to institute some changes. So I adapted this block stakeholder strategy grid, and I'm going to talk through it. As you see on, I think it's your left, the agreement starts at the bottom and goes high. So low agreement to high agreement. And then at the bottom, you see trust. You see the trust is continuing throughout, it's going to be a common thread throughout the keynote. So as you see the stakeholders, we're going to start the top left, fellow travelers. And I want you to start thinking, who are some of these fellow travelers? Fellow travelers have high agreement, but low trust. And low trust could be that you haven't built relationships. This grid sometimes helps folks determine who their next phone call should be. Who do they need to call up to have a coffee date with? So fellow travelers are aligned with your vision, your goals, and your objectives, but trust has not been established. They may have a vested interest in where you're going, but again, they're just sort of there, they agree, but they don't have a lot of trust in you and what you're doing because there hasn't been a relationship built yet. And I want you to start thinking, are there folks that I need to contact? Are there people I need to bring to the table so we can build that trust? And these people who you're thinking about already agree with what you're doing. Getting families what they need, right? Putting kids in kinship care placements. Providing for parents that are going through substance abuse, right? Trying to do things differently. Okay, so high agreement, low to no trust. Let's go to allies. This is really, really intuitive. Your allies share your vision. They want you to succeed. They support you fully. They even provide their expertise, their information, their resources. They email you saying, how can I help? They highly agree with you, and they have a high amount of trust. All right? Think about who those allies are, because you can pull on them and continue to work with them as you promote change. All right, let's go to the bottom few. All right, we're going to start with adversaries. This is low agreement and low trust. These are people who don't agree with where you're going with your changes in your agency, and they don't really trust you. These people with whom building agreements and developing trust have failed, right? There's a lot of avoidance, a lot of resistance to what you're doing. Actually, there's often active resistance to the changes you're trying to make, right? And we're going to talk about how do you manage these different stakeholders. But I want you to start thinking about who might be those adversaries, right? Who might be those folks in your community, those entities that there's just a disconnect on what your vision is and where you're going. And there's also failed trust. The next one are challengers. These folks have low agreement but high trust. And you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? These are people who you may have been working with for quite a long time. They know you, they know you're passionate and committed to child welfare. They just don't agree with the methods you're taking to get to where you're going. They're like, I like you, you're a good worker, you're a good professional, but I don't agree with where you're going with this. So this is low agreement, high trust. They have conflicting visions. Their goals and methods are different, but there is a high trust relationship. They're very honest with you as well. They challenge your efforts while also providing critical information. So these are people who, they're not your adversaries because they actually trust you and believe in what you're doing, but they don't believe in the methods you're taking to get there. So I want you to start thinking, oh, do I have anybody like that? And we'll discuss how do you manage those folks. And of course, the folks in the middle, the neutrals. These are people who are cautious, non-committal, and unaware. These might be folks in your meetings where you're like, I don't know what this person believes. Are they even aware of what we're doing? Like, they're very non-committal, very unaware. You're laughing because you might be thinking about somebody. So those are the people who are very neutral and they don't really say much. And then when the rubber hits the road and it's time to make some action, they start saying things like, well, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing again? And then you have to try to figure out how to, tap into that leadership style of patience, right? I did this workshop with this model a few weeks ago, and it was interesting because the group I was working with, they're all on the same team. And one of them had an epiphany, and we all sort of froze. One of them raised their hand and said, Dr. Pryce, I know that you want us to think about our partners, but I just realized that we might be a fellow traveler. So they started realizing that even themselves, they don't trust each other. There's low trust amongst their teams. So they're just sort of traveling along. They agree with equity. They agree with justice. They agree with it, but they're not connecting as a team. So I want you to also think about interpersonal partnerships in your agencies as well, where folks might be as you're trying to create change. So we're not going to talk about allies because we sort of know how to work with them. Those are the folks that are in our corner. But we're going to discuss how do you manage a fellow traveler. So again, high agreement, low to no trust. You're trying to maintain the agreement, but increase the trust. So your goal is to focus on trust here. Acknowledge the lack of trust and promote honesty and accountability. That's not easy. How many of us think it's easy to tell somebody, it doesn't feel like we've established enough trust between us? But that could go a long way to say that, because it starts to cultivate that relationship. Reiterate the value and importance of their support. Say, I know we haven't built that relationship, but your support on this project would be really, really vital. Identify your own contribution to the lack of trust, right? Say, I haven't done enough to build that relationship. That shows a level of humility and that we've left our egos at the door. Any changes we want to make, we can't be ego-driven in what we're doing. Identify and discuss any caution that exists and ask them how they would like to be updated on the project, right? Like, do you want to stay updated? Do you want to be a part of this? Right? How do we bring you in to build that relationship? Fellow travelers. All right, challengers, how do we do this? So they have low agreement with our methods, but they trust us. We have a relationship with them. It's not easy to disagree with somebody you really care about, right? And this happens. We're in an election cycle right now. It might be happening to you, right? So a goal is to really try to build agreement around your methods. Again, identify their skills and talents and how they connect to the project, right? So you want to directly say your skill set, what you're doing and what you're good at is really going to impact our work, our vision. State your position. So get really good at I think the terminology sometimes is elevator speech. Talk about what is your vision, why are you doing what you're doing, and be really clear about it and how they can contribute. State what you think their position is in a neutral way. So this is a tough one sometimes, because you have to say what you have to say in these meetings. I was in a staff meeting a year ago and somebody said, do you realize that we have so many issues because nobody is saying the truth? Nobody is speaking the truth in this room. So this grid, this relationship, this stakeholder map is really helping you get honest by saying, I feel like we've worked together for a long time and I trust you and you trust me, but we're butting heads on this path. Like, how do we get through it? Just saying that out loud. Calling it what it is, right? Extend a personal invitation for them to be involved. And some people might be thinking, well, isn't that a given? No. See how far you get when you say, I want you to be a part of the changes we're doing. And I want to personally invite you to contribute X, Y, and Z. Engage in problem solving so you can build something together and confirm their commitment to support your project. So this is an ongoing way to manage a challenger. Again, it might be intimidating, but I love working with challengers because there's already a relationship. You have to just try to figure out how do we agree on where we're going. All right. So this one's sometimes the tough one. So this is low agreement and low trust. And unfortunately, sometimes your goal for this one is minimize the threat on your project. Sometimes you have to figure out who's going to be on board with your changes, because we don't want to stay stuck in park if people just aren't getting on board and if people are absolutely trying to come against what you're doing. Let's think about this. Estimate the impact on your project if this person continues to refuse to be on board with the changes. Right? I worked with an organization recently that they were having some adversarial issues with their judiciary, with the court and the judges. I know none of you have those issues. But they were having some issues with their court system for some reason, and we really had to think about, like, how will they impact this new change that we're implementing? State your position. Again, be very clear about where you're going, why you're going there, and what you're doing, and how this will benefit them as well, of course, as it is to your workforce and families. Ask questions that respectfully uncover the root cause. And this one's tough. And when I do longer workshops on this, we actually do some role playing. Like, how do you uncover the root cause of somebody's resistance? How do you say, we've been in this meeting for about 45 minutes now and we're not making any headway. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're just not open to hearing us out? Or, how do you really pull that open and try to process that together as a team or across teams, depending on who's at the table? Identify your own contribution. We talked about that. If there's a lack of trust. Sometimes there's a lack of agreement because you haven't been clear about what your methods are. That's why you'll see continuously state your position. What are you doing? What exactly are you planning? Because again, some people might say, oh, now I get it. I'm on board, when they finally understand where you're going with it. In the meeting with your plans, but no demands. This is if they continue to be in that adversarial role. Just say, this is what we're planning to do. This is where we're going. And you can't really make any demands from them. And of course, at the bottom it says, if you're going to go around them or over them, tell them your plans. And I think that this sometimes gets to the point where you can't bring them on board. You have to figure out how to keep moving forward in the most respectful and collegial way possible. Adversaries. Your neutrals. Your goal is to educate and determine their position, right? These are people who you don't know if they agree or if they trust at all. They're very non-committal. State your position. Ask directly where they stand, right? I admit that I'm not clear on where you stand on the changes we're trying to make. I'd like to understand your perspective. Ask them directly. I know that's a little scary because there are people in all of our teams and all of our partnerships that nobody really asks them anything because that's the person. That's how they are. But I think just challenge them and say, hey, tell us about your perspective because we're really not clear on where you are with all these changes. Ask what it would take for them to support your project and extend a personal invitation to be a part of the change. Distributive leadership, bringing them on board. In the book I just published, I talk about the workforce often feeling like things are happening to them, but I want them to be a part of the change, changing who they are and how they approach the work, but also being a part of systems change. All right, stakeholders and partnerships. So as you're thinking about who those people are, fellow travelers, adversaries, challengers, now I want you to think about how change impacts people psychologically, particularly on your internal teams. So this probably looks familiar. This is really this grid that's taking us through a transitional period of change. And it's sometimes hard to admit that there is a transitional period of change. And often people have to end, let go, and lose what they've always done. And I know so many leaders that come to me and say, why can't they just get it? Why can't they just, get this? We've been trying this for so long. And I say, could they be grieving what they've been doing for 20 years? And they say, why are they grieving that? That's the antiquated way. It's not helping families because it's intuitive and they can do it in autopilot and they might be just trying to survive in their own lives. So you're asking them to add 2 to 3 new things, right? So they have to end and let go of what they've always done. And then often when that happens, they get into the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is that ambiguity. You're trying to figure things out. You're trying to make plans. You're building logic models, right? You start to get subgroups in your agency trying to figure out where to go next. And we're all trying to get to that new beginning where things feel different. People are sounding different. And families are feeling different outcomes from our work. Let's talk about the neutral zone because a lot of agencies find themselves here. So when you're in the neutral zone, people constantly worry about the future. There's a desire to try something different, but they still feel confused, disoriented, and things don't make sense the way they used to. Sometimes they feel lost and scared that they're on the wrong path. Are we doing the right thing? There's a level of excitement, but it's also overwhelming to have so many possibilities. And as tough as this zone might be, it's exciting when I see organizations in this zone because that's where you start to see innovation, creativity, right? So this takes us through the entire process. Again, that ending is the loss, acknowledging, saying goodbye, letting go of the old way of work, changing into, okay, we're in the in-between time. It might be a little chaotic. Some people feel like they're in the wilderness. They're like, what is going on? Somebody's laughing. They're like, we're in the neutral zone, Dr. Pryce. That's us. But it could also be creative, right? And your teams can be a part of that. When you get into the new identity and the new beginning, people start speaking with new lingo, right? They don't start saying disparaging things about families. And one organization that really started to sense this new beginning, people talked about parents differently. And that seems maybe small, but they said, oh, people are talking about parents in a different way. You're not walking through your organization overhearing disparaging comments about mom or disparaging comments about dad. You're hearing strength-based language, empowerment language, right? That showed them they were in a new beginning in their organization. New beginnings look different for every agency. I'm curious, if you don't mind raising your hand, how many of you would say that your agency is still in the ending, letting go, saying goodbye phase? You can raise your hand. It's okay. Okay. How many of you would say you're in the neutral zone? Quite a few of you. And how many of you would say that you're really sensing there's a new beginning in your agency? That is awesome. Exciting. The people that are in the new beginning, did you have a neutral zone? You're like, yeah, we did. It was painful. We got out of it. I'm going to talk about strategies depending on where you are on this grid, because it'll be important to think about how do you usher someone through this process of change? How do you manage them? And how do you do that with patience and a level of leadership that is effective, right? Because it's not for the faint of heart, right? Again, leaders are like, I just want this to be different, but my team is X, Y, and Z, right? We just talked about that. Let's talk about what you can do as a leader if you're in the ending zone, right? And the first thing, acknowledge what you're letting go, what's being lost, and why you're letting it go, right? And again, some leaders say, why would I tell them that we're letting that go? We know that it's not helping families. We know that it's, not getting us where we want to go. But acknowledging, I know we've been doing this since we started this agency, but we have to let it go, and this is why. Acknowledge that change is hard, and recognize that a transition is not going to be easy, and then be clear about what you're now embracing. And I put some examples of organizations that I've worked with where they're embracing safer homes, cultivating belonging, tempering the trauma of separation, strengthening family bonds, maintaining family connections. Most recently, they're building a kin-first culture where they want kinship care to be the norm and foster care to be the exception, right? That's a big statement, right? But they're saying, this is what we want to build. That's where we want to go. We're letting go of foster care being the norm and kinship care being sprinkled here and there when we can make it happen. If you're in the neutral zone, my heart goes out to you. But I also want to encourage you to say there needs to be a level of patience and time and presence. And as we know, time and presence are very different. I know we know people that put a lot of time in something, but they're a million miles away. So I want you to be patient, give your time, and also be present as you can with your team during this process. Be repetitive. And this is hard for me as a leader because I don't know why I believe that when I say something, that should be enough. So I've had to learn this the hard way. So as a leader, having that level of patience to repeat, what is the vision, where are we going, and repeat encouragement to your team. Invite your workforce to be a part of the change. That's also been a common thread today. Leverage their creativity. People that are a part of changes are much more apt to continue on and be successful, rather than you saying, I figured out what we're doing and now you have to do it. Engage in hard discussions about the barriers and benefits. So this is important, because I think we get excited about change, we get motivated, we might even get some new funding and we get a team together, but we don't talk about the barriers to what we're doing, but also the benefits. For example, when we talked about building a kin-first culture and making kin the norm, right? We have to have an honest conversation about what circumstances might happen where a kinship placement isn't the best placement. Those are not hard, easy discussions to have, but you have to have those things. And it's really important to have those in the neutral zone because you have the level of creativity and flexibility. Empower your workforce to set goals, and then set a realistic time frame for neutrality. One of my leaders recently said, Dr. Pryce, we've been in the neutral zone for 2 years. How much longer do I have to be present and give them time? And I understand that, right? So we have to set a realistic time frame from where we're going with our work so that you're not feeling like you're spinning your wheels in the mud. Right? And that new beginning, be vigilant about team members who have not progressed. Think about the realistic time frame. You might have to move forward, right? And people might still be struggling with the psychological impacts of the change. But now it's time to be vigilant about who they are and then devise a plan, whether it's mentorship, right? Whether it's coaching they need, whether it's something individualized so that you're not keeping the entire agency back because of a few people. Build diverse teams and implement new policies and operating procedures. I always tell people I'm a policy wonk. If you want true change and for it to be formalized and accepted and the new law of the land, so to speak, in your agency, create a policy, right? Dr. Martin Luther King said that a policy can't change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. So if a policy is in place, there's accountability, right? Your new identity should be front-facing, known to the community, and also during recruitment and onboarding. It's really important to me to say this next part because I work with agencies a lot on how to change their system so they do the work differently. And then they do a mass hiring. And they bring in people that are not clear on what their vision is, and they get kind of drugged back a few steps, right? So if you're not clear on who you are and it's not front-facing, then everybody you're interviewing, you could be bringing people in that are really not going to keep your work moving forward, right? So I always encourage leaders, and each and every one of you in hiring practices, give your potential people that are coming on board the opportunity for COCO, right? Consider other career opportunities. Right? If you are really clear about who you are now as an agency, and you give them this in a very clear way, and you're in an interview and you say, we're family first, we believe in kinship care, we believe in justice, you're being really clear, they can opt out. They can say, oh, I'm not about this, right? But if you're not clear, then I just feel like you're gonna be 10 steps forward and then 5 steps back. And often we do that. And I know it's hard because we need people. And the workforce crisis is intractable in many areas. I also encourage you to seek feedback and maintain momentum. One thing I think that's been hugely impactful for the work that I do with folks around change management is tracking and monitoring, looking at data, telling your data story, and then retelling it with new data to think about the impact that you're making. All right. How am I doing on time? Doing pretty good? Okay, great. I do want to share this exercise, and I'll make sure you are able to get a copy of this, but I want you to consider this with your team when you're charting a new course of change. I did this with our team back in Florida, and I want you to think about an island. Somebody yell one out. Where do you want to go? Honolulu? Oh, okay, that's a great one. All right, so we're gonna go there. I thought somebody else said Miami. I was like, we don't wanna go to Miami. No, I'm kidding. I just came from Florida. No, but think about this island that we're all trying to go to. Like, that's our vision, right, for the work that we're doing in our organization. Of course, our boat is our team. And this next thing is going to describe all of the different aspects of this infographic. So the sailboat is our team. The shore and the island, or the beach, is our ultimate goal of where we're going. And then the wind up in the left-hand corner is going to be what is pushing you forward. What are those positive things about your team that are helping you with implementation? The anchors, stabilizing forces, and things that support the team from drifting off course, are what provides the team rest and reevaluation. Some people feel like an anchor is sort of bad. They feel like an anchor makes you feel stuck. But this anchor is a time to throw it over, take a moment, take a breath, and think about what you're doing and be more intentional and methodical. What are those ways you can do that with your team? And then, of course, the rocks are pretty clear. These are pitfalls and things that slow your team down. Okay? So again, when you do this, hopefully, with your teams, when you're thinking about charting a new course, again, your team is on the boat. I want you to ask your team, what's helping us? What are the good things about our team? Get them to think about the positives, all right? Make sure you set a vision so everybody knows where they're going. What is the goal? What is the vision of our work? What is that change goal? And then think about what stabilizes us right now, right? But what are we going to need to do in the future to stop, take a breath, and think about what we're doing so we're able to course correct if needed. And I also want you to try to be a little bit preemptive and think about what are those things that can get in our way. If you are building a change project and you're trying to manage and navigate change, but you never stop to think about those rocks that are going to be hitting you in the future, you'll be caught off guard. So I want you to get your team thinking, what could slow us down in the future so we can make a plan for those things, all right? When you think about that. All right, as I wrap up, I want to talk about motivation versus momentum. With any change, again, it takes motivation to get started, but that's not what takes you through the change. I guarantee you that. So motivation is really built on emotion. A reason for someone to act and behave, and it's driven by an emotional reaction to something. Motivation could be anger, shame, happiness, excitement, all types of things, right? But motivation decreases over time, and I want to talk about momentum, which is the driving force gained by the development of a process or a new course of action. It is not a feeling. It is not about emotions. So when you come in on Monday morning and you have a new change in place and you're just not feeling it, this continues to go if you have a momentum, if you have a plan in place. So how do you build motivation? Proximity to the community, right? For example, if you really want to focus on equity, focus on youth aging out, you get close to that community. Some people call this lived experience folks, right? Coming in to talk to you and be a part of your work and give you insight. So you get proximal to what the community is you're working with. And often that really, really motivates you. To stay motivated, acknowledge responsibility and culpability. So when somebody is motivated, they often start saying, I contributed to this. I perpetuated this. I could have done that better. Like you'll start to hear certain language because they're motivated to be introspective. Folks who are motivated are often vulnerable and they want accountability. And they're also re-educating themselves. They're listening to podcasts. They're thinking about, how do I think about equity and family preservation and community resources? And they want to learn more. They're motivated to do the extra work, right? And you'll start to see that. You'll say, oh, my team is highly motivated. But there will come a day when they are not, because we're human. And I talk a lot about when you're trying to make a lifestyle change or get healthier or lift weights, you're not going to always feel like doing that, but consistency gets you there. Let's think about ways to stay and keep momentum. Write your values in cement, even if your strategies are in sand. So I live by this, right? I encourage you to, what are your values in this work? What are your values as an agency? Put them in concrete, put them in cement, which really means they don't change. Maybe you add values, but this is your static. This is why we're doing this, right? And maybe you already have that, which is great. Strategies are in sand because they should shift depending on what families need or what your workforce needs, depending on what you're working on. When you have a vision, when you have values on those days you don't have motivation, you're going to continue to do the work. Find and build the community. Back to the lifestyle change. If you wake up and don't want to go to the gym, but your gym buddy is already on the way, you're going. You're going. Don't be that person that leaves them hanging. So I encourage you to build a community of people who are trying to think the way you're thinking about this work, right? So on those days you don't feel like it, they can say, hey, we got this. Remember the vision, right? Create new professional habits. Somebody recently told me about a new professional habit they have, particularly about equity and bias and thinking through what they're doing with their work, where if they feel that intrinsic feeling of that bias come up, they talk to a colleague, they say, I've had this mom on 3 different cases and I need to talk about it with somebody who has a little bit more clarity around this topic. That's a new habit of hers now, because before she just put her head down on her desk and did the work. But now she wanted somebody who she could really talk to about that case. We talked about measuring your feedback and measuring your work and seeking feedback, because what keeps you going back to the gym is when you start seeing more muscle, right? I want you to continue to think about what are those impacts that you're making with your change. And then the last one says it's a marathon, not a sprint, but that doesn't mean you can't start today, right? I can't express enough how encouraging it has been to travel the country, to hear people say, we have figured out a way to balance change, and we have figured out a way to push and challenge our teams, but acknowledge this work is hard. So as you're going about change and navigating it and managing it, there's a dance you have to do as leaders. And one of those dance moves is, I know this work is hard, because if we don't affirm that and validate it, then people are not going to feel seen and they're not going to feel appreciated, right? But then we try to gently push them toward doing things differently and thinking differently about the work. And the last quote is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And I love this quote because it's a big theme of the work I do, because as you all know, sometimes we can't change things in child welfare because it's much higher than us. It's in DC, or it's in the state, or it's something that just feels intractable. But I tell people that doesn't mean put your head down and give up. That means how do you change? How do you change, and how do you speak differently to the next mom that you talk to the next day? How do you speak differently with your colleague the next morning? There's a way that we can implement changes in ourselves, even if things feel so rigid at our offices. Thank you for your time and attention. So I don't know if we have time for questions, but I saved a few. Yeah? You absolutely can. Can I give them to you to do that? She's asking about the slides. But I'll make sure I send them to the proper person. I don't know how to put them on the app.
Trust assessment tool that we might use with our teams?
So we built our own trust assessment tool because we have a large survey, and we pulled a scale from another one. I don't have one offhand, but maybe it's ours, the one that we built. So ours is an awe inventory. We call it the awe inventory that we can maybe provide. And you can look up the Florida Institute for Child Welfare. It might be on our website. Yeah. Great question. How do you assess trust in your agency? Anything else? Or any comments or questions for me?
When is your book coming out?
It's already came out. It's already out. Yeah. It came out in March. Any other thoughts or questions? Any takeaways? Anything for me? Yeah, we got a question right here. I think they want you to be on a mic. I don't know if you want a mic.
It's just a comment. I had so many takeaways, and now you've given me a framework to move forward, so thank you very much.
Okay, good. I'm so glad to hear that. And I'll make sure I get the slides on the app so you can start to really utilize these with your teams. Somebody in the back. Hi, Ann. I just saw you down there.
Yeah, let me just say I'm your newest, biggest fan. You are so well put together. I can feel your love and care into exactly what you're saying. I am a person with lived experience who now advocates for these changes and these evolvements of care for others. So I think you have a spiritual calling in what you're doing, and I thank you so much. So if anyone wants to, I think one of the things that I would like to see where they're saying they're neutral is bring on people who have lived experience. It is primary to hear the obstacles and how they overcame it, even with or without good and decent help. You know, there's been good pieces through my journey, and then I can see a lot of deficits. But I decided to say, instead of being angry, instead of being hurt, I said, you know what, I want to leave this world a better place. So thank you for doing that too. God bless.
Thank you so much. While we wait on somebody else that might have a question, I'll share. I thank you for bringing up lived experience, because I want to encourage you all to continue to promote lived experience, because there are people who don't believe that we should be utilizing lived experience. You know, they feel like we're making wide-scale changes based on someone's individual life. And I think that I want to encourage you to push back against the narrative that someone's experience with our work, with our system, doesn't matter. And because I hear the prevailing conversation about we're over-relying on lived experience, and I don't want that to be discouraging to any of you. So thank you for promoting that, and I want to encourage you to do that. Yeah.
Jessica, I want to say great job. You knocked it out of the box. I am so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, Darnisha, if we don't have any other questions, I'll give it back over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Jessica, so much. One more round of applause. Whew, everybody take a deep breath because you made it through CrossSites. Wow. What an incredible crowd, incredible energy, what a fantastic way to bring it home. But we are going to exit the same way we entered.
Good afternoon. Just in closing, I just want to express a couple of things. One of those being that I'll introduce myself again. But first, I want to start with the prayer. Please bow your heads. Da apa oktomavata nansuakaita nania. Atekwa papita roipe. Ziko tsokova tomavata waiku. Namama kasika taveni. Namitusuna. Nahina aiku namihani kata. Keta aiku nami petsara. Saku nami munhe. Oyo na nanadami. Moatsku nami kamakata. Nami sutai. Usuni. Ura. Amen. Madoa weka. Nanani atsa Marla Nonai. I come from the Chikova, Nonai, Pavoda, Suaipita, Coffee, Tachawika, Nido, White Pigeons, and Pierce families. I am half Comanche, a quarter Seneca, and a quarter Huron-Band Potawatomi. The way I was raised and rooted in my culture is to always give thanks. And so I wanted to express a couple of tokens. I want to first thank HRSA. I want to thank the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And if you could, please, I want to call just a few individuals, if you don't mind. And I'm not for sure if Mr. Matt is here with 0 to 3. Okay, if someone could come up and receive his token, that would be wonderful. Thank you. I also want to call the National Indian Child Welfare Association. And also this one is for you. I would also like to call up Tara and Mariah. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Darnisha. So in closing, I wanted to sing the Comanche Blessing Song again. Those that felt it the first time that I shared it with you and expressed your gratitude and your thankfulness in me sharing this culture. It's important, all of the work that you're doing. You all are the boots on the ground, and I applaud your efforts that you make on the daily and every day of your life. You know, those that have contributed years of service, decades. It's important. And my hope and prayer is that you will continue to be blessed as the days and years go by. And I pray that your homes are just as you left it, if not even in better condition, right? The good thing is what I share with you is a Comanche blessing song, and what it means is bless all of us. Nami sutaina anan sawakayu na anan sutai kita oyokana nami sutaina nami sutaina anan sawakayu na anan sutai kita. Huroko.